Hilchos Maaseh Hakorbanos Perek Shloisha Asar. The Laws of Sacrificial Procedures, chapter 13. This is another chapter about the Korban Mincha, the flower offering. Yesterday the Rambam told us that there's 3 types of communal flower offerings, and then there's 9 types of individual minchas. 9 types of individual flower offerings. These 4, the first 4, are obligatory ones. So if somebody sins, you have to bring a mincha. If a woman is suspected of adultery, she has to bring a mincha. Every time a Kohen is inaugurated to the service, he has to bring a mincha. A Kohen Gadol has to bring a mincha every day. And then the last 5 are donations. A person wants to voluntarily give a flower offering, there's 5 ways to do it, and we're going to discuss in detail exactly how each of these minchas was made. These 2, the Saita, we already had a chapter on it, way back in the Rambam's 4th book, in the Laws of the Saita, and the Chayte is going to be discussed separately. But we're going to start with the chavitin, the pancakes, and the chinuch, the inauguration. So the Rambam says, halacha aleph, mitzvah saseh, it's a positive mitzvah, lasos kol mincha ki mitzvasa ha'amura b'Torah, to perform the procedures associated with every flower offering as the mitzvah is written in the Torah. So, starting with the chavitin. B'keitzad asiyas chavite kohen gadol, how did they make the kohen gadol's pancakes? So, it's going to be really more like pitas. That's why I put here pictures of pitas. Looked something like this. We're going to see there was 12 pitas that were baked every day. Ultimately, they would divide the pitas in half, bring 12 halves in the morning and 12 halves in the afternoon. So the Rambam goes through the process of how it was made. Maybe isarin shalim. First thing you do is you bring a full isarin. That's the minimum amount of flour you can bring as an offering. Umakdisha. And you consecrate it by putting it into a holy utensil. This is a container that can hold a full isarin of flour. You put it in there, you declare it holy. V'chaytzehu b'chatzi isarin shebamikdash. Then, after it's made holy altogether, you divide it in half. There's another smaller measuring cup in the temple that held a half of an isarin. You divide it in half. The reason you did it in this order was because even though in the end it's going to be offered in half, but you don't make it holy in halves. We don't make things holy in half. No half measure holiness. You go fully holy. So you first put it in the bigger cup and divide it in the smaller cup. Then you bring 3 lug of oil. 3 lug is what we call 12 revi'it. Revi'it, about 3 ounces, is the size that we use in liquid for Torah all over the place. So it's 12 revi'uses, 3 lug. And the reason that we do 3 lug is because it says, Shenemar bashemen te'aseh. The chavitin are made in a pan with oil. But since it doesn't say how much oil, that means lahoisif lashemen keniske hakeves. That means we're going to put oil, the minimum amount that was usually brought with the sacrifice. The smallest amount of oil that was brought with the sacrifice was a lamb. Because for a ram and a bull, you bring more oil. But for a lamb, you bring 3 lug of oil. So therefore, we bring that amount of oil with the chavitin. You take the flour and you mix it with the oil, and you scald it or you scald it with hot water. Typically it's understood to mean that you pour the flour into hot water. But the Rambam in the commentary to the Mishnah writes that you pour hot water onto the flour. So you begin a baking/cooking process. And then after you've mixed the flour with hot water, every half of the isarin of flour, because you brought a full one, you divided it in half. From each half, you create 6 loaves, for a total of 12 loaves. The achas hayunases, they were prepared one by one. You didn't make them all together. The ketzad oiseh, how do you go about doing that? You take the 3 lug of oil, and there was a measuring cup, a small measuring cup that held a revius, about 3 ounces again. And you divided the oil using that cup, which basically means you're going to have 12 of those little cups. Because if you take 3 lug, there's 4 revius per lug, so 3 lug is 4 times 3 is 12. So you split it up, revius l'chol chala, and you give out 1 revius per every loaf, because there's 12 loaves, 12 revius. But you don't use all the oil at once. What you do is, v'oife hachala me'at, you cook this loaf a little bit, v'achar kach koile oisa ala machvas, and then you fry it on a pan with the rest of the oil that was set aside for it. Don't cook it too much, don't bake it too much. Shenemar, because the Torah uses a funny word. When it comes to this mincha, it says tufine. What is tufine? Tufine means bein bashel v'na. It means somewhere between baked and raw. Tufi is related to afiyah, baking, and then ne has to do with raw, no. So it's kind of like in between. And then once you have all 12 loaves, baked and fried, you divide each loaf, each pita, into two by approximation. You don't have to be exact. In preparation to bring half in the morning and half in the afternoon. Other commentaries say you don't divide anything in half. You just take 6 loaves and put them in the morning, 6 in the afternoon. The Rambam says no. You have to divide each loaf individually, bring 12 halves in the morning, 12 halves at night. And that's because the Torah uses the word pitim, which means split. How do you split it? Just again, by approximation, you rip it apart. Then, you take each half. So you're holding a half a pita, right? It's like, kind of like half moon shaped. And you fold it and you divide it again. So it's offered actually in quarters. So that each half loaf is itself divided in half. And then you take all those halves and you offer them on the Mizbeach with half of a kaimetz of frankincense. That was the spice that came along with most minchas. You did a kaimetz, so 3 fingers full. You take half of that amount and you put it with the halves of the loaves that are going in the morning. And there are the other 12 halves of loaves, which you also have to fold in half, etc. You bring with the other half of that 3 fingers full in the evening. That is all the order for the minchas chavitin, the pancake or loaf sacrifice brought by the Kohen Gadol every day. Says the Rambam, if it was the mincha of the inauguration, it means the Kohen, the first time he enters the temple for service, he had to bring a special mincha. He followed the exact same procedure with one difference. You don't divide it. No dividing the pitas, no halves, none of that. You bring it all together as one with the 3 fingers full of frankincense. Both go completely to the fire, burnt for Hashem. So those are 2 of the obligatory flour offerings. Now we move on to the donation, the voluntary flour offerings. The first one is what's called minchas hasoiles, the mincha of raw flour. Minchas hasoiles keitzad hoisanases. How was the raw flour mincha performed? Maybe isarin soiles, oy kama esreinos, oy kefi nidrai. You bring 1 isarin of flour, that's the minimum, or you could bring multiple, or whatever you promised. As the Rambam said yesterday, you could promise to bring 1,000 if you want. But you bring all the flour that you promised, the full quantity, v'shemen haroila, and the oil that is appropriate for it. Yesterday the Rambam said, whenever an individual brings a mincha, for every isarin, he brings a specific amount of oil, a lug. And so, however many isarins you promised, bring that amount of oil together with it. Umayded ba isarin shal mikdash. And you always use that measuring cup of the isarin that was in the temple. That's how you measure out the flour to see that you have the right amount. The neisin shemen bikli, and the way you do it is as follows. You pour oil onto the bottom of the utensil, the achar kach neisin Allah ves hasoiles, upon which you pour the flour, the achar kach neisin shemen acher ala soiles, and then you put more oil on top of the flour, uboilel hasoiles boy, and you mix it together. So oil, flour, oil. The achar kach neisna bikli shares. Then, this whole time it's not in a holy vessel, just in a regular bowl. Then you take the mixture and you put it into a holy vessel. V'tzak l'soicha shemen, and you pour more oil on it. The shemen shenasan tchila, im hashemen habolol, im shemen sheyatzak hakoil loig li'isarin. It's not a lot of oil. The bottom layer of oil, the top layer of oil, and the final pouring of oil all comes from 1 lug, which again is about 4 times a review, so about 12 ounces. Think of a soda can, okay? It's 12, right? I think it's 12 ounces, right? 12 ounces, yeah. So if you have a soda can full of oil, that's how much oil went per isarin. So it wasn't so much. You poured a little bit on the bottom, flour, a little bit on the top, then you transferred it all to a holy utensil, and then more oil, and that was it. And then you add the frankincense. Also, again, it's a 3 fingers full, not a lot. And then you offer the part, you do kmitza from the whole flour, offer that on the altar, the rest goes to the Kohen. Halacha vav minchas hamachavas v'hamarcheshes keitzat. Let's talk about the minchas that were brought in the pans. One was brought in a machavas, which is a regular pan, or a flat pan, and one was brought in a marcheshes, which is like a deep fryer, a deep pan. But they were both offered in the same way. Noisen Hashemin b'kli, v'noisen alav haseilas, v'noisen al haseilas shemen acher, u'boilil haseilas. So the beginning is the same as the last mincha. Oil, flour, oil. The achar kach losha b'poishin. Then you take this flour oil mixture and you knead it with warm water. And you bake it in the shallow or deep pan as you promised. You break it into pieces. Put it into a holy utensil. And you pour the rest of the oil on it. And then you add the frankincense onto it as well. So that's the only difference is basically that small baking process or frying process in the pan. Halacha zayin, ma bein machvas lemarcheshes. What's the difference between these two pans, machavas and marcheshes? It says the Rambam marcheshes yesh la safa. The marcheshes has a tall rim. The habatzik she'oifen eisei aleh harach, and therefore any dough you bake in it will come out soft. Shahar yesh la safa ve'eino yetze, because it's not exposed to the outside. It has a rim. It'll hold it, and it'll keep the dough soft. Umachavas ein la safa, but an ancient frying pan has no rim. It's flat. And therefore, you have to use a rougher dough. Otherwise, the dough would come off the sides. So it shouldn't go this way and that way. The batter had to be a rougher batter so that it can stay in place and bake on the pan. And that is the minchas machavas and marcheshes. Then we have what's called the minchas mafei tanur. Torah itself calls it mincha mafei tanur, a mincha baked in an oven. Minchas mafei tanur keitzad. How do you go about preparing the oven-baked mincha? Im chalesi. So if you're going to make them as loaves, more proper loaves, again, it's not really a loaf of bread because none of the minchas were made into chametz. They were all kept matzah, but they could be shaped as loaves in the sense that they were kept not to rise for 80 minutes, but they were thicker consistency. So the first thing you do is you mix the flour with the oil. There's no oil, flour, oil concept here. You simply mix the flour with the oil. V'lash b'paishin, knead it in warm water. V'oifa, and bake it. Upaisis, and slice it. V'neisen b'klishares, and put it into a holy utensil. V'neisen aleh levaynasa, and pour its frankincense on it. V'ein ba yitzikas shemen. There's no stage at the end, like the other minchas, where you pour some more oil on the flour or on the loaf. Shenemar, because it says, chalois matzos, blulois b'shemen. If you make them chalos of loaves, they have to be matzah, but just mixed with oil. No pouring of oil. The imri kikinhi, however, if you make them wafers or flat cakes, then lashas hasoilas b'poishin, same thing. You take the flour, you knead it with warm water. And after the cakes are created, you anoint them or you smear them with oil. Shenemar, the same verse says, if it's the flat cake matzahs, then it's going to be anointed with oil. The Rambam says, it seems to me that this smearing happened after it was baked. You bake it, and then you smear it. The kates on Moishchan, how do you go about smearing these flat cakes? Maybe like shemen l'chal isarin, you bring again, same amount, however many isarins of flour he promised, you bring one leg per isarin. U'moishchan v'chayzer u'moishchan ad sheyichla kol hashemen shebaloik. And you just keep pouring. Pour the oil on the dough, pour more oil, smear it again, till you finish the quantity of oil that you have in your cup. Halacha Yud, kol arba menoches elu ha'afuyos, all of the 4 minchas that get baked, kisha oifin oisan, when you bake them, oifin kol isarin eser chalis, you have to bake each isarin into 10 loaves. In other words, all we said so far, if you bake it in a pan or you bake it in an oven, we just said how to take the flour and turn it into bread. But how much bread do you make from the flour? So every isarin turns into 10 loaves. But if you did more or less, it's kosher. The ketzad paises in and how do you break them into pieces? How do you slice them? Special way to slice them. You break it into 4 quarters. You fold it in half again, and you separate the four halves, the 4 quarters. If the mincha was being offered by a male Kohen himself, who anyways the whole mincha is going to be burned on the altar, so you don't do the splitting and the halving. Mekulan psisim kezesim, all the pieces should be about the size of an olive. V'im higdala psisin or hikdanesim kshedim, if they're bigger or smaller, again, it's kosher. Halacha Yud Aleph, loy balal, loy pasas, loy higish, loy mashach asare kikin. If you missed out some of the steps, you didn't mix the flour and the oil, you didn't have the minchas, you didn't bring them close, touch them to the mizbeach's corner, you didn't anoint the wafer, the flat cakes, kshera, it's kosher, loy nemru kol advarim edu ala mitzvah, shekachi mitzvasa. These steps were just part of the ideal, optimum way to fulfill the mitzvah, but they're not actually integral to the mincha itself. Now that we have all these details, which the Rambam kind of organized in a sense of general rules and more particular rules, now let's actually walk through. Let's do a sample walkthrough of the mincha. Seder havas ha-mincha ketzad. What is the order of bringing the karban mincha, the flour offering? Mevi adam seles mitech beisai biklasis shel kesef or shel zav or shel shar minei matches. First thing is, you bring a metal utensil, preferably gold or silver, or any other one, and you put your flour from your house inside it. Klisha huroi li klisharis, but it has to be a type of utensil which could technically become holy. Therefore, it has to be metal. If it was the raw flour mincha, you put it right into a holy utensil and you sanctify it there. But if it was a baked mincha, then you don't put it into a holy utensil till you bake it. You first bake it in the temple and you split it, you have it. And you put the broken pieces into a utensil. Point is, once the flour is in a holy utensil, at whatever stage it was, you add the oil and the frankincense. Okay, so here you have flour, or the baked one, you have it, oil and frankincense. Then, at this point, you transfer it off to the Kohen, because all this could be done and should be done by the owner, the person bringing the sacrifice. At this point, you have to give it to the Kohen. And what does the Kohen do? The Kohen brings the flour offering to the Mizbeach, touches it to the southwestern corner, which was here. Remember the airline, southwest, that's the sign. Just to the corner of the corner. Just touch it to the actual corner, that's enough. Then you take the frankincense on top of the flour and you move it all to one side. And you do the kmitza from the place where the oil mixed the most with the flour. Because it says, misolta umishamna. You should do the kmitza from its oil, from its flour and its oil, which means you're looking for a place where there's oily flour. Then you take that kmitza and you put it separately into another holy utensil, because that's going to the altar. If you split the kmitza into two vessels, it's not holy. You have to re-sanctify it. And then, once you've taken the kmitza, you also have to pick apart all the frankincense. And you add it to the kmitza that's already in the holy utensil. Bring it to the altar, you salt it. And you pour it onto the fire right out of the container, the holy container. If it's a Kohen offering it, of course you don't do kmitza. You just put salt on all of it, and you throw it all to the fire. And that's the standard procedure for whatever mincha it is. The differences between all the minchas are in preparation stages. But once they've been prepared and they're in a holy utensil, you follow the same procedure for all minchas. Halacha Yud Gimel, we keep on saying the word kmitza, keitzad kaimtzin minaches hanikmatzes. How do you do kmitza? How do you do this 3 fingers full thing? It says the Rambam, kederech shekaimitz kol adam. Like anybody would bend his fingers and take something out. Poishet etzba'osav al pas yadai. You spread your fingers onto your palm, v'kaimitz, and take the amount. Kamatz berashi etzba'osav oy min hatzdadin. If you did kmitza with the edges of your fingers, you didn't do like this. You put your hand into the flour like this, or from the sides. Lo yaktir, you should not offer that. Pim hiktir hurtza, but if you did, it's been atoned. Pim haisif b'kaimetz. If you added to the 3 fingers full, how do you add? Flour, by nature, sticks, right? So if you keep your fingers a little bit more distant from the palm, compact, exactly, right. So the pressure will compact the flour. So you can technically put your 3 fingers into the flour, keep them distant from your palm, and you'll end up with much more flour in the kmitza. So the Rambam says, Hariz apostle, that's disqualified. because you're looking to do like a regular average person would do, which is where you close your fingers onto your palm. You must close your fingers onto your palm, and that's whatever fits in there, that's the amount of flour that you bring on the altar. Not a lot at all. As a matter of fact, the Rambam doesn't mention it, but in the Talmud they talk about how you have to use your pinky and your thumb to even rub off any extra flour from these two sides. Because whatever fits in here, that's what fits in here. Now the Rambam does say, Ein kaimetz paches mikishnei zeisim. No kmitza should be less than 2 olive-sized portions. So you should kind of, I guess, maneuver the fingers in such a way that it could hold 2 olive-sized portions, about 2 ounces, but they have to be with closed fingers. Part of it is essential to all of it. So if you're missing part of it, you can't bring any of it. Also doing the kmitza and offering the frankincense are essential to each other. Same thing, the flour and the oil are essential. If there's an oil shortage in Jerusalem and you don't have enough oil for the flour, you can't bring the flour offering. In the oil itself, the full amount is essential. You don't have the full amount, you can't bring anything. Which is no less than 1 loig. Again, about 12 ounces per isarin, as we explained. So you have to have that full loig. You don't have the full loig, you can't bring it. Only if you have the full loig, you can bring it.